Our 41st president.
I'd like to call the December 3rd, 2018 meeting of the New Canaan Board of Education to order. First is to approve the November 19th, 2018 minutes. We have 3 different minutes to approve. Can I get a motion on those? Deanna?
I move to approve the November 19th meeting minutes.
Second? Sherry? All those in favor? It's unanimous. Okay. Next is to review and approve the agenda for this evening. Deanna?
I'd like to move to make an amendment to tonight's agenda in adding a moment of silence to honor the passing of our 41st president, George Herbert Walker Bush.
Is there a second? Hazel. All those in favor? Great, thanks. We start now. Moment of silence. Thank you. Thank you. Next is comments from the public. To ensure the public's right to be heard, the board has set aside time during the meeting for public comments. 2 minutes will be allotted to each speaker and a maximum of 15 minutes to each subject. Is there anyone who wishes to be heard? Yep. Please come up and just state your name. Thanks.
Hi, thank you. My name is Hugh Gilbert. Testing. Okay. My name is Hugh Gilbert. I'm the father of 4 children here in New Canaan. New Canaan High graduating classes of 25, 28, 30, and 33, God willing. I want to thank the Board of Education for addressing a topic that's near and dear to my heart and the hearts of many of us in town, which is that of school starting times, for your ongoing consideration and thoughtful deliberation of the topic. One of the things that I've grown to love in New Canaan is the fact that we're a community of high achievers, overachievers even. And we as parents are no exception. We want the best for our kids. My kids are involved in a myriad of after-school activities and before-school activities and weekend activities and you name it activities. But the one thing that I care about even more than them achieving all that they can and all that they're capable of is that they do it in an environment that is healthy and well-balanced, which is one area and perhaps the only area that I know that I'm convinced that they can have a better childhood than I had. Mine was filled with many nights at my desk, in my room, finishing homework assignments very late, only to have to wake up 3 hours before the sun in order to get ready and get to school in time for the starting bell in my school district. That's something where I think we can do better for my kids, where they can have it better than I have had it. I also love the fact that we're a town of leaders. Our parents are leaders, our kids are leaders, our public servants are leaders, which is what's made it a bit difficult for me as I've seen schools and school districts in our area and around the country push forward with later school times for the health and welfare of their students while pushing New Canaan and the leadership position that we hold so dear a little bit to the side, at least in my opinion, on this issue. So for me, as I've studied more about this issue, one thing that's become clear to me personally is that I think it's a matter not of if, but when we ultimately push school times later. So the question that I have is, which generation of parent leaders, of student leaders, and of public servant leaders like yourselves would be the one to flip that switch? And increasingly, my hope is that the answer to that is this one, here and now. Go Rams. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, good evening. Carl Schimmick, I'm parent of a 5th grader, Molly, and 2 2nd graders, Ryan and Tyler. Thank you to the Board of Ed for this evening to allow us to speak and talk about this topic. The major medical associations have conducted research and published both evidence and recommendations that teens should start school no earlier than 8:30 a.m. It's not an issue of sleep hygiene. or being less distracted by electronics. It's not an issue, it's an issue of what we now know about their biological sleep patterns. As a district focused on educational excellence and student wellness, this is information that New Canaan can't ignore and should be acting on quickly. Performing the necessary analysis to develop a successful implementation plan should be the #1 priority for the Board of Education this year. We know that change is not easy and agree that it's important to carefully plan any significant change. However, we should not simply evaluate this issue any longer. Action is called for. We also know that in this budget environment, difficult decisions will need to be made and may require some sacrifices. No sacrifice is too great, and all trade-offs should be considered, as this will improve the wellness of every single student in grades 7 through 12. We urge you to immediately create a subcommittee, a timetable of meetings, target milestones to track the progress, and regular updates to our community on this important issue. If Norwalk, Greenwich, Wilton, and so many other school districts across the United States can follow the advice of major medical organizations and make change happen quickly, why can't we? Change is hard, but we owe it to our children to be leaders, not waste precious time and make difficult decisions, especially when the science proves it's to their benefit that we do so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ivan Nedalchev. I'm from 80 Harrison, and I hope I didn't cut anybody off.
It's okay.
But I'm a father of 2 children. I have a 6-month-old and a 3-year-old, so they're quite little yet. But recently I came upon a book called Why We Sleep, and I shared it with Mr. Hayes, and it's a very, very profound reading, and it's a very scientifically based piece of literature, and I urge every one of you to read it if possible. The reason being, this will make a difference in your life, generally, in the lives of your loved ones, and just everybody who reads it here in the audience will attest to that. I am an endodontist, so I'm a root canal specialist, not quite a physician, but I see a variety of patients every day, and after reading that book, I've been asking them the question, how is your sleep, how is your sleep hygiene, and you'll be surprised to find out how many people are chronically sleep deprived in their life. And there's just massive implications for adults. Now for children, the implications are even more significant, just partly because they're a developing individual. They are emotionally mature, so they're actually growing their brain from the bottom up, and sleep deprivation is a disaster basically when it comes to that, because it not only prevents repairs of their ongoing structures in the brain, but it also prevents development of their prefrontal cortex, which is what controls thought, and it's the CEO of the brain, and also their emotional control, particularly REM sleep deprivation, which happens at the later parts of the night. This severely hampers their emotional control. And this happens in adults, but with children, they basically can't shed all the emotional baggage from previous days. The extreme example of that is patients with PTSD. They literally cannot shed the emotional connection between what happened to them and the actual emotion itself cannot be dissociated, so they cannot get a rest. And the same thing, similar thing happens to children that are sleep deprived. In addition, sleep deprived children can be diagnosed by a psychiatrist with ADHD any day if they're sleep deprived, but the psychiatrist is not informed. So they will just diagnose them with a specific condition, possibly put them on medication.
So you're at 2 minutes. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Go for it, guys. I know it's
Thank
hard,
you.
but let's go.
Hi, I'm Hank Ellett. I'm co-president of the Teachers Assistant Union in New Canaan. I'm a 38-year resident in New Canaan. My kids both came through the system in 20 and 23. I love the system. So the last 10 years I've been working as a teaching assistant. One of the things that we're talking about is later starting time. What you may not realize is that it would be a very hard impact on many of our teaching assistants. That would double their commuting time in the morning and in the evening because of the later start. Many of your teaching assistants are also coaches. Rich Bilan, for example, our girls' hockey coach, has 50 girls.
That means that they would have to have morning practices because of the inability to get ice time in the afternoon. And I've been with the crew program for 20 years. We have one of the largest crew programs in the country. It's gone from 6 kids to 250, and we number 2 Olympic athletes among us. But one thing you can't know about rowing is that you cannot row in the dark. And if you move us an hour later, we're going to have to move to morning practices again because there would be no way we can accomplish it. New Canaan has a very proud sports program. Approximately 70% of the kids in our school are in sports. And we think that they deserve a right to be able to do it in a timely fashion. And if you just push it an hour later, it means practices are going to be later, games are going to be later. And it's going to be difficult on everyone. So I urge you to consider both sides of the equation. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'll be really fast. Parent of a 7th grader and a now college freshman who played on the volleyball team here for 4 years. And no,
Can you
she's
just-
not crew.
Can you just state your
And
name?
not hockey. Steve Eno, 133 Springwater Lane.
Thank you.
I know every parent's going to have a different opinion, but as the parent of an athlete who played all 4 years here, she would have loved to have a later start time because you have practices and games after school, and then you don't get home till 8 o'clock. So then you don't have any time to actually do your homework before midnight, and then when you turn around and you're up in the morning again at 6:15, 6:30 to get to school, you got no sleep. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks. Yes.
Hi, Victoria Carrasco Ocio. I'm not in favor of this change. I think we have to think in the people who works at school and the parents who also works in the morning. So we have to arrange our early meeting in the morning and the transportation also for the kids, and also increase the cost for the budget of this school. So I'm not in favor of this change.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Dr. Thomas Herbig. I am a longtime resident of New Canaan. I have 2 kids at Sachs, soon to be at high school as well. So we feel the early starting times on a daily basis. Many others have already spoken to both pro as well as con some of these changes, and I think they're important to all consider. What I would like to talk about is a timeline for making a decision one way or the other. As is well known, this issue has been considered for the last 2 years or so. And this is a problem to be solved, but it is not one of the most difficult problems to be resolved. So one thing that I think would be extremely helpful would be for the board to either create a subcommittee or discuss it as a board itself, and make regular reports to the community about this, say on a monthly basis or so. I think that could really help in terms of transparency, in terms of parents understanding what's going on. And I think it would make it much easier for parents to accept the decision whichever way it goes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments?
We already got a great introduction to this book, but we just read this, many in our group, and it's such a great demonstration of the vital importance of sleep that we decided to purchase a copy for each of you. We have 20 of them, and we'd like to give one to each BOE member and to administration and staff members who would have a big role in doing this, pretty much a lot of people that participated in the focus group. We hope you'll take the time to read this book. It includes just about everything you could ever want to know about sleep, both for adults and children. And in case you don't have time to read it cover to cover, there is a note inside that highlights the part that we feel are most relevant to the decisions on later start times, including the adolescent sleep cycle and sleep's role in learning, managing emotions, and safety. Reading this book really reinforced our sense of urgency, and we believe it will have a similar effect on you. At a minimum, it will provide you with the information you will need to make informed decisions on behalf of our children's health. We hope it will also be a valuable tool for you to use as leaders when speaking to people who may think it is unnecessary to make this difficult change. And if you're currently one of those people, we hope reading this will change your mind. I just want to finish by reading a short quote from the book. Here he is talking about school start times. Without change, we will simply perpetuate a vicious cycle wherein each generation of our children are stumbling through the education system in a half-comatose state, chronically sleep-deprived for years on end, stunted in their mental and physical growth as a consequence, and failing to maximize their true success potential, only to inflict that same assault on their own children decades later. I hope we can change. I hope we can break the parent-to-child transmission of sleep neglect. When sleep is abundant, minds flourish. When it is deficient, they don't. And I'll wait to hand them out at the end because I don't want you guys to get distracted and dive right in. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other comments? Thank you. Next is reports and recognition. The first is the Alice and Crisis Advisory Board update with Ms. Rocco, Mr. Bedard, and Ms. Carriero.
Sure. As the podiologist mentioned to the board, last year we had talked about supporting the ALICE training for members of CAB, which includes, as I'm sure Joanna will mention, staff, teachers, administrators, health staff in the district, but also folks outside of the district, all of our first responders, police, fire, ambulance, others. We hosted that session this summer, had a great turnout, and really were inspired by what we learned. And so we asked CAB to come back to share that information with you a bit and to let you know about our next steps as we consider continuously improving our procedures based on best practices and learning across the country. So, Joanne, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to update you on some of the work of CAB. As Brian mentioned, last year we came and we gave you kind of a general overview of some of our work. And during that presentation, we mentioned ALICE, but didn't give a lot of information. Since then, we've done a lot of training, a lot of research also, and a lot of communication with all those concerned. So we wanted to come to you and just update you. We're really at the beginning stages of implementation of ALICE. We still have some work to do and a lot of decisions to make also, but wanted to give you a quick update. So ALICE is an acronym for Alert, Lockdown, Inform, Counter, and Evacuate. And what it really is an options-based approach to lockdowns. What we have been doing has been a traditional lockdown, which a lot of schools thought was best practice, and for many years we thought it was best practice also. But since then, we've done a lot of training. Many of us have gone through ALICE training and have become certified ALICE trainers, and really beginning the process of implementing ALICE in our district. And really just the past 2 weeks, we've done some training of our staff. We're introducing it to our staff and just some of the options that are part of ALICE. So it's a proactive approach. With our traditional lockdown, we would have a lockdown, children would go into the classrooms, teachers would follow the same procedure, which is locking the door, pulling down the shades, turning off the lights, and students would all go into one corner of the room where they weren't visible and would just wait. So that was the traditional lockdown, where all of the experts in the field of school safety really are saying that is not the best approach to lockdowns because we're not doing anything other than sitting and waiting. So ALICE offers us some options, which we'll go through in just a few minutes, but it's a proactive approach. And it provides those options where it's not something that's sequential. It's not where you do this first, you do this second. It's really all based upon the situation. And through the training, through things like tabletop trainings, where we really kind of train our mind to think more flexibly than we have been. As Brian mentioned, during the summer, we hosted an ALICE training. It's a 2-day training from 8 o'clock to 4 o'clock. It's a pretty intense training. There were 61 attendees altogether from many districts in Connecticut, some districts in Massachusetts, and also New York attended. We've had 24 people in our district and several of our police officers also who have been trained. We also had some representatives from the YMCA who want to follow the same procedures that we follow in our public schools because they know that our children go there after school, and they've started their training with ALICE also. We took that information back from our training this summer, and several of us trained two summers ago. We debriefed with all of our administrators at our administrative retreat, wanted to share the training and the thoughts behind Alice, and really get the thoughts of all of our administrators, answer any questions that they had. And then we also brought it back to CAB, and many of our CAB members did attend the training. But we really wanted to talk about it to say, is this something that makes sense for us in New Canaan? And unanimously, everyone agrees that we need to make some changes to our lockdown procedures and that this does offer the best options for us. These are all of the people who are now certified ALICE trainers who went through the training either last summer, 2 summers ago, or this past summer. So the 5 principals, we had 7 assistant principals. We had 3 teachers. We wanted to get the thoughts of teachers also because they're the ones that are in the classrooms with students. So we had Jim Zambrano from New Canaan High School, Anna Hendry from Sachs, and Sue Driscoll from the elementary level. So we had 1 teacher from each of the 3 levels. We had 2 of our campus monitors, Dave Wanigat, our lead campus monitor, Hubie Smith, who is our campus monitor at West School. We had 4 members of the police department. We invited Leon Krolikowski, our chief of police. He attended our 2-day training. Jeff Lambert and Jeff Deek, who are our 2 SROs, and also Joe Feranga, who's our youth officer. And then from the district, we had Janet Reed, Dan Clark, and John Perna. So we had a good representation from our district attend the 2 trainings. And in the training, they give a lot of research to support Alice and the research behind why this really is best practice. They also put us in actual scenarios where we go through the components of Alice, and we really look at survival rate with all of those different scenarios. And one of them is the traditional lockdown, where they actually have somebody playing the part of an intruder. We're in a classroom locking down and going through the different options for Alice and just what is the survival rate with each of those options. So they make it as real as they possibly can. And it's a good experience to go through it because you really see the power of being empowered to do something rather than to just sit in a classroom and wait when you really have some good options if there happens to be a violent incident or an intruder in the building. As we know, it happens everywhere. These are some examples with business, probably some of the ones that we've heard most about: the Pulse Nightclub, Aurora Theater, K through 12, Sandy Hook, Columbine High School, Marjorie Stoneham Douglas High School, Virginia Tech. So there's many other situations, and when we look in the newspaper, listen on TV, there's so many situations of violence where we really have to start thinking differently so that we are prepared. And it really is a life skill. It's not just about being in school. It's about being everywhere and knowing that there's options to help ourselves be more proactive and just really protect ourselves. So I will turn it over to Steve, who will go through some of the components of Alice.
Thank you, Joanne. As Joanne mentioned, ALICE is an acronym. Christy and I will talk to you a little bit about what each of those acronyms stands for. The first one being alert. Alert is the first notification of danger you receive. You may hear a PA announcement. It may be made by an assistant principal, someone who sees something, alerts the entire building. It may also be an alert through a sensory input, such as screaming, yelling, people running. And why is that most important? Because that really initiates your response in an emergency situation. It would initiate you to either lock down, evacuate, and so forth, which I'll talk through in a little bit. But again, just want you to, some information that goes along with alert and why it's so important. One thing the research does say, a violent incident lasts approximately 5 to 10 minutes, and police responses happens in approximately 5 to 6 minutes. So in terms of alerting people to act appropriately and swiftly is really important. Next, the L stands for lockdown. In about 2012, the Department of Education and Department of Homeland Security said publicly that the freeze and lock-in is no longer their preferred method for a lockdown and emergency response. So what we call lockdown here is like lockdown plus. What else can you do in a lockdown situation And one of those things is to barricade your door, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. But when you do lock down in Alice, it's spreading out throughout the room, so we don't have everybody huddled. You look for escape routes in your room. When we talk to our teachers, if you're locked in, do you have an exterior door that leads out the back? Because again, we'll talk a little bit about an evacuate, but that's what you want to do. You want to get away from the emergency situation if it's safe. So when you do lock in, what are your options? Is it to barricade? Is it to escape through a window, through a door? So those are some of the things that we talk about in our enhanced lockdown or our lockdown plus, as I mentioned. And again, in a lockdown, you'll see some of the pictures. The two teachers are using a bookshelf. Some other kids are using some furniture. When we took the course, we actually had to do a teach back in terms of lockdown. And some of the things we used were chairs, depending on what type of doors you have, a belt in terms of securing a handle or a latch. So really getting to know your classrooms, getting to know your building. So that's one thing we've asked our teachers to do, familiarize themselves. So if they did have to go to an enhanced lockdown, what would they do and how would that look? And the I is inform. Once you've alerted, we want to make sure that we have accurate information being transmitted to not only the people in a school, but to those people who are coming to the school. And the benefits of that are police can respond to the appropriate place. They know what's going on with as most accurate information as possible. And it also keeps people informed. And how we do that through our PA system, our phones, our radios, all those devices that we have in our school to communicate with one another on a daily basis, not just in an emergency situation.
I'm going to finish out the acronym. So C stands for counter, and what Alice says is counter isn't fighting, but it's taking back control. So if you find yourself confronted with the intruder, Alice wants you to be empowered to be proactive and do something. So whether that is throwing something at them to distract them or just disorient them to, hopefully, be taken down, not have any targets, or swarm the gunman and try and take the weapon away. Again, trying to increase safety and remembering that the good guys outnumber the bad guys, and age appropriate, of course. And E is evacuate, and this should be the preferred response. Alice stresses if you can get out, that's what you should do. That should be your first mode of defense. If you know you can safely evacuate, you should do so. And remembering that Alice isn't sequential. So it may be the best option in the moment to lock down and barricade, and once your space is barricaded, then looking to evacuate from a different exit, a window perhaps, if possible, or if that's not a possibility, then looking to counter from your barricaded lockdown if someone was to enter that space. And just letting everyone know that they can leave, that they do have, the authority to leave in that situation. So overall, the goal of Alice is to increase survival through proactive response options during a violent critical incident. It's training our brains to think critically and making informed decisions to act. It's not sequential. It's using clear information in real time to make decisions. And we don't ever want to forget that we still want to encourage everyone to see something, hear something, say something. So some next steps from CAB is to provide information to parents, train teachers, staff, and students, run tabletop scenarios for staff, continue safety drills, evacuation drills, lockdowns, and then continued Alice training and opportunities for training non-certified and all other staff members in our buildings.
Thank you. Any questions? Sherry?
Thank you for the presentation. Sorry. Thank you for the presentation. It's obviously very sobering. And unfortunately, in today's world, the most important initiative that we have in our schools. And so my question is simply, if you have all of the resources you need? Is there anything more you would do if you had more resources? Because given today's reality, we need to put everything behind this.
I think we want to continue training of, have more of our staff members go through the ALICE training, because it's really powerful to go through those 2 days. For our staff, we just started our training with them, and it was really just an hour session. We'll have more training of the staff, but I think the biggest request would be to have more people go through the actual 2-day ALICE training, and that's pretty costly.
Yeah. I think the benefit of that, too, is it's a trainer's training model, where they'll also be able to lead training with us. So the more people we have in the schools that are able to lead training, I think makes everybody feel more comfortable and confident if an emergency situation were ever happen. So I think that's one point. Just want to make sure that I reiterate that it's a training of trainers model to help us deliver this important training to all of our staff.
Yeah.
It might be helpful if you could step back and talk about how you chose to use ALICE. Are there alternative programs to ALICE that we decided not to use? And why did we choose the ALICE program?
We did some research, and I think it was actually one of our police officers who a few years ago brought it to CAB and suggested this, and that we have someone come in and speak to us. I think it was Mark DeFelice, actually, who first brought it to our attention. So we did some research behind it. And 3 of us went last year to 2 summers ago just to see what was it about. And it was so compelling to go through those 2 days of training, and just the research behind it, the number of school districts that are using it. And we went to Shelton Public Schools for this, and they are an ALICE district. So I think they said there's something like a third of the school districts in the United States are using ALICE or some form of ALICE, which can also be called Run, Hide, Fight. And it's something that we've talked about at CAB, just kind of using those 3 steps, run, hide, fight. But this is kind of a more formal approach to that. So really just the research behind ALICE, the number of school districts that are using it. Our police department really endorses it also, and really supports ALICE.
Could you just give us some of the local districts that are using the ALICE training?
I don't actually know, other than Shelton. I really don't know any other districts around here that are using it, and just haven't really researched
So like
that.
Newtown is not using it?
I don't know.
I do know Ridgefield's in the process. They went to the training with us 2 years ago, so I know they're having a lot of conversations internally about adopting ALICE. So those are some of the districts I do know.
Okay.
Sorry. So again, thank you for doing this. This is so incredibly important. Just wondering, when you do the run-throughs at school, like I know you have drills quite often. I get all the emails and the updates, which I love. I think it's so important for us to know before our kids come home. But are they, I mean, it says here that's next steps, that the students, like, do they know this? Do they know that when they're in a lockdown, like, are you doing this in the classrooms? Are you moving the tables? Are you, like, because that could get kind of scary, right? I mean, I don't know. Like, how is it handled in school when you do the drills?
Mm-hmm.
We haven't done them yet. Our plan will be different, I think, at each level. But at the high school, our plan is, and we're still working on it, but to hopefully maybe have some grade level assemblies to just start the conversation with students and just helping them understand that when we do practice lockdowns, that we will practice moving some furniture just for that. Not all of it. We don't want them to break anything. We don't want them,
right,
unplugging computers and things like that, but just training their brains to think differently. So in this moment, what would they do? They know, okay, I'm going to move furniture in front of the door. So at the high school level, we'll start to physically practice that during lockdown.
But currently, are they doing more? I mean, do you do these types of drills now? I mean, it's not just fire drills, right? Are you doing these drills or no?
We have not started these types of drills. So I'll use an example at Saks. Our next lockdown drill, our teachers have been given a directive, to go into a traditional lockdown, but to spread the kids out. And then to survey your room and themselves kind of take a look at things. So we're going to gradually introduce some of these skills to all of these skills to the kids. But the one thing I want to say about, especially with the younger grades, the most important, leader in these situations is our teachers. So spending the time with those teachers. And again, we're having a lot of internal conversations through CAB about how to introduce this properly to our kids. And we don't want to jump ahead without having those conversations to make sure, we consider, them as we introduce these skills and have these conversations with them. But that's also one of the benefits of having tabletop discussions where you can present certain scenarios and have the teachers guide them through some of the action steps if it were to happen.
Right. And just to reiterate what Sherry said, as obviously budget is upon us, like it's important for us to hear, I mean, to get all these teachers certified seems to be super important. So it'd be great to hear that, as the numbers come through and stuff. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Jen, if I can just add to your question, just very briefly, to their response. Tragically, we learn every time there's something that happens in school districts. So we've learned from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas that you should never do an unannounced lockdown in a school. So now it's prepared. We talk to teachers in advance. We talk to the students in advance. And so they go through the training that way, knowing that they're going through training in order to best sort of prepare if you ever had to call an actual lockdown. Right. And so that's where we're taking the time to really think it through with them now versus just calling the lockdown, having them lock the door, go in the corner and wait for us to release the door. So it's a more active, they're more actively engaged throughout.
I think the preparation before our drills is what's going to be the one big change. And I apologize, that was actually on my slide about the no more unannounced lockdown drills, so I apologize. But the preparation for the drills, I think, is how we'll prepare the kids and have those conversations with them.
Sherry?
So just going back to Deanna's question about Alice is currently employed in about a third of the national school districts. Is there a national coalition around school safety best practices that we're tapped into? I mean, I would absolutely think that there is, and I just want to make sure that we're leveraging those best practices and that we're confident with the approach that we're taking, and that, again, we've got the resources to employ best practices here in New Canaan.
There really is no agency related to school safety that supports traditional lockdowns anymore, and really hasn't in a long time.
Yeah,
So they all support the options to do something to keep yourself safe.
Right. And at a local level, I would add that that's the real benefit of CAB, where it meets monthly and reviews the best practices, knows the district well, and is able to look at those best practices and find the best ways to integrate them into the district, into the schools. So you heard mentioned briefly of sort of the difference with Alice at different levels, right? So we're going to be doing something a little bit different with our K-4 students than we do with 5-8, than we do with 9-12, based on the developmental readiness of the students and our knowledge of the district and what we have. So that's what CAB's really, there's a lot of good things that it does all the time. I think one of the most significant is that reviewing those best practices, looking at the district, and identifying the ways to implement the best practices continuously. And that's thanks to the makeup of the people that are on the committee and really their dedication to this work.
Mm-hmm. So they've endorsed Alice.
Absolutely. Many of them were trained over the summer. Many of the members of our Crisis Advisory Board. We use acronyms all the time. So CAB stands for Crisis Advisory Board.
I was thinking of CABE when you said that.
No,
Okay,
CAB. It's the Crisis Advisory Board that meets
And
monthly.
What about CABE? I'm just shocked that there's not more national dialogue on best practices and sharing of information on this topic.
There's quite a bit. There is quite a bit of conversation and quite a bit of sharing of information, both with school districts, local law enforcement, national groups. The FBI is involved. Secret Service has done some things. So there's quite a bit of information out there. I think what Joanne mentioned was that not one of these groups endorses the traditional lockdown that we've now moved away from. But they are all endorsing something, and it is something that is an active scenario for all the participants that are involved, so that you increase their chances of success, of making it through whatever occurs. But again, we learn as a profession, and as our safety folks learn enormous amounts. By looking back on what's happened, and we adjust, both in the schools, our first responders adjust their reactions and what they do. Really, if you look back over time, you'll see significant changes because we do learn sadly, we learn from these attacks.
Maria?
Is the training site specific? Does it have to be in your district or?
No, we wanted to have so many people trained that we decided to host it here, but it does not. We can send people to training anywhere.
I'm just thinking of CES, one of the RESCs, put the word out, and you can do the training for more people.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah, by hosting the training, we were able to, for every 5 attendees, we were able to have one.
Every 15 attendees, we had a free
We were able to comp someone. So that's, if you recall, a year ago, the feedback from the police department was they were trying to find money to do this training and were having a hard time. So we were able to send enough people to comp most of the police officers as well. So it worked out well for us to host it here.
But if it's a train the trainer, do you save money by doing it? You know, the people that have been trained, can they roll it out?
Within the buildings, absolutely. So, you know, Christy, Joanne, Steve, and others have been having conversations already and doing some training. The difference is the training itself is very experiential, and you can't really replicate that because of the equipment it takes and the time it takes, and you know, that sort of those experiences that they go through. But certainly going through the policy, the procedures, protocols, and educating folks that are involved. We're doing all of that now.
Penny?
So thank you again for doing this important work. I guess one of the things, this is very empowering to more people in the process. And what I'm wondering is, what's the recommended percentage of teachers that are trained in a district so that this works well? You know, we've taken a great step, and we have people at every single building that are trained, but, you know, you're talking about sort of pushing out decisions depending upon the configuration of your classroom and all types of things. So I'm just wondering, have you given thought to how many people in each school we actually need to train?
There's not a recommended number of trainers. I think for our district, actually, we do have a high number, but the more people we can send, because it is powerful to go for the 2 days of training where they take you through so many different situations that have happened and how implementing these options have saved lives. So they talk about real school shootings and how people have survived by doing some of these options. But, you know, our goal is to train everybody in the district, including all of our non-certified staff, secretaries, custodians, maintenance. We want everyone to be trained. So right now we're looking for how do we do that to do the initial training with everybody and then get more people certified. But there really isn't a recommended number of people to become certified trainers. We have at least 3 in each building, and with some of our buildings, we have more certified trainers.
Okay. Well, I look forward to hearing your plans as you all develop those for moving this out and training more people in the district.
Deanna?
So I have 2 questions. One, I still have to go back to the conversation that Sherry and I keep going to. It is shocking to me that you can't list more than 1 or 2 districts in this, you know, nearby area that are doing this training. So I guess what I'm wondering is, what are they doing instead? Or, you know, why aren't they using it?
I'd have to research that. I mean, I'm assuming a lot are still doing the traditional lockdown. I just haven't researched to see, or I don't think any of us have researched to see which surrounding districts are doing. And I just can't recall from our training what other school districts. I think it was Wallingford that had probably as many people go to the training as we did. Trumbull Public Schools also had quite a few people attend. Fairfield Public Schools had a few people attend. Are they adopting the entire Alice? I can't say for sure, but we can research that and, you know, do some contacts and just see.
Particularly
any
in
other
the state, I would think we would be sort of on the forefront of, you know, districts being sort of cutting edge on this kind of training if, you know, this is the standard. So I think it would be important for us to understand what other people are doing, and, you know, as in most things, getting best practices across districts can only be helpful.
Yep.
So, and then the other question I had is, you know, as you're rolling this out in the trainer, what time frame do you envision having enough capacity within the buildings to be able to, you know, implement a lot of these pieces and have your first, you know, Alice-type drills?
Well, at the elementary level, and I can only speak to elementary, we're already doing a lot of the things that are part of Alice, but we haven't called it Alice.
Okay.
We do window drills where kids evacuate out the window. So we've done that for a number of years, and I think the other schools have all done it also. So that's evacuation, but yet it hasn't been part of ALICE. So kids have been trained to do that. We do fire drills where we block exits so that if this is your normal exit and it's blocked, where would you go? So that's also part of ALICE. We haven't done something like barricade where, we would not do that with elementary students. But I think we're all talking about using staff meetings, where we use a staff meeting, we tell our staff, go back to a room with your team and practice barricading and come back and tell us how did it work. Have somebody outside your door trying to get through the barricade and how did it work. So I think we're ready to roll it out to staff and start practicing some of these things with our staff right away, because it's important and we know that the research supports it. In terms of kids, it's going to be different with each level, and we really would not change a lot with elementary students other than doing what we're already doing. And I was mentioning to Steve and to Christy, I was walking down the hallway today, and we had just trained our staff last week. One of our second grade teachers stopped her class, and she said, if there were ever an emergency, they were in the hallway, and we couldn't get out of the building our regular way, which way would we go? So she already had kids thinking, if we can't get out of our classroom, where would we go? And they were looking at different classrooms that had exterior doors. They said we can go out the main entrance. So teachers are already starting to have these conversations. It's not scary for kids because we talk about fire drills. We've done lockdown drills. We do window drills. So there's lots of things that we are already doing to prepare our kids for this. So, I don't think we can wait to roll it out, to have staff start doing some changes. And, I think at middle school and high school, they may be moving faster with children and certainly sharing more with children.
And the CAB and the administration wanted to come before the board and share with you an update and let you know what's happening. And then also, I know communications home are being drafted at each of the different levels to just share the change with parents, so that they're also able to talk to their children about what's happening in the school and what we're doing. Because again, it'll be announced in advance and afterwards, so it gives parents an opportunity as well to talk to their children. Because really, this training is more than about the school day as well. Right? I mean, that's, I think, what the other slide really represents, that tragically we've experienced this in all venues and public spaces and things. So whether it's at a movie theater, in a school, or anything else, if a child, any one of our kids is ever in a situation like this, this training was transferable and will help them regardless of where they are. So we want parents to be able to talk to their kids about what it is we're talking about, what we're doing, and reinforce that with them. And so that's the next step, is to get those letters out after speaking with all of you.
Katrina?
Oh, thank you. While this is all incredibly important, I can't help as a parent of kids in the district to think about prevention and how that, is the most important step we can take. And I'm just wondering, I know there's a see something, say something. There's new measures for security. I'm just wondering, is the CAB, do you feel that you're up to date and we're thinking about every possible preparation in terms of identification and working with the police department, working with whomever we need to work with to be sure that we're doing everything we can as a district to be thinking about just preventing this situation?
Yeah, one of the drills that we do is a plainclothes intruder drill in conjunction with the police department. We usually organize that 2 or 3 times a year at each school. And the first step of that is see if somebody could get into one of our buildings through a side door. And I can tell you, most of our schools, definitely Saks, they've never been able to get into our building through a side door or a back door, which is the first step, which we've done well at because we do have a secured school. Our campus monitors constantly walk the building, making sure all of our exterior doors are locked and secured. The second step of that drill is that we actually do let them in the building and see if someone does encounter them and what they do. One of the best stories is 2 years ago, we did that, and within about 5 seconds, a 5th grader grabbed their teacher and said, "That man doesn't look like he belongs." So we were able to, take that data back. But that's one of the proactive drills we do to test, the security of our buildings. Because I think if we can secure our buildings and we can take that proactive measures, to prohibit somebody from even getting into our building. And again, having the campus monitors at each school in terms of checking people in, using the buzzing system. It's just another barrier. We talked a lot about barriers in Alice, another barrier somebody has to go through to enter our building.
And I think the work that the district is doing, the great work that you're doing with emotional intelligence, ties in, and students, recognizing emotions and labeling them, and I think that all ties in too.
I think the best thing we can do is make connections with our children, because if you look at all of the research of who commits this type of crime, it's people who are disconnected. So, as Christy said, the work with emotional intelligence is all around connections with children.
Any other? I just have one question, which is how have we sort of tried to improve our connectivity to the police and fire department in these sorts of situations? And then how internally at each of the buildings are we, connecting people, whether it's phone, radio, et cetera, so that, response times can be quicker?
I can give a brief update on the camera system that we have. Last year, we worked with the police and developed a memorandum of understanding that if there were a call for a lockdown in any of our schools, they could click a button and have access instantly to those camera systems within those buildings. Generally, we don't publicly discuss a lot of the details around our school security. Alice, we're comfortable doing. It's all on the website, and it's something that everyone should know and we should talk about. But we have been working, CAB has been working with the police and fire and others to shorten that response time. We have reviewed the radios. There are radios in every school that have essentially a button you can press that calls 911 instantly. Of course, people have cell phones and other telephones for calling 911, and that's still the best thing to do in case of an emergency. And so we're training even on that, because people sometimes hesitate to call 911 thinking somebody else must be doing it, and you have to do it. And it's better to get 1,000 calls than not to get any. So we work through that as well. We also have now external strobes that go off, and we've also put them internally in the large assembly areas, so gyms, at libraries in some schools, other places where students might not hear the PA very clearly, so that it will indicate for them that we've gone into a lockdown, and we would use that as well. And that's a button that can be pressed that notifies people who may be approaching the building that we're in lockdown, and also students and others who are in areas that the PA might not be very clear. So that works as well. We're also in the process of putting together a grant request with the state. They're in phase 4, I believe, of the security grant. So there's some more enhancements that we're looking for through that grant. And if that is accepted by the state, then we'd be coming to the board to talk specifically about some of the pieces that are included in that security request. So it is something that we're continuously looking at. And if I missed anything, certainly feel free to jump in.
I think our campus monitors can communicate directly with the police department, directly and quickly with the police department also, so in each of the 5 buildings.
Great.
And that was something that our trainer said is unique. He has never heard of any other district that where you can communicate directly through a walkie-talkie.
Excellent. Any other questions? Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Yes. Next is the school start times discussion with Dr. Lutzy.
Yes, and I think you'll see on the agenda, it just says Dr. Lutzy. It was meant to say Dr. Lutzy Administration and the entire Board of Education, but
I'm sure we'll jump in.
I'll get us started here. But we had this on the agenda as an opportunity for the board to have discussion and share some reflections and what have you. Additionally, some questions were raised at the last meeting, and it does for some of us feel like it was yesterday, given Thanksgiving in the middle and everything else. But some questions were raised, and we wanted to share some feedback and some data and information with the board based on some of those questions. So I thought that to begin, I'd give it just an update on where we are in the process, what we've been doing, share some information with you, and then open it up. So as a starting point, I'd like to go back to our focus group. The focus group has been mentioned a couple of times here and there, so I just thought that would be a good place to begin tonight, just as a recap. On Wednesday, October 24th, a focus group convened here in the Wagner Room to discuss school start times and to consider some items for consideration, including developing guiding principles as the district weighs the many dimensions of making a change in school start time. In attendance of the focus group were one Board of Education member, 8 parents, 2 of whom are active participants in the Healthy School Start Time New Canaan, 7 district administrators, 4 building administrators, 4 high school teachers, the New Canaan Educators Association president, the director of athletics, director of transportation, and the director of visual and performing arts, and the district's head of nursing. So in all, it was 29 people who got together, and all coming together with a variety of backgrounds and experiences and perspectives, and they attended the focus group as participants on that morning for 2 hours from 9 to 11. As this was a meeting to discuss items impacting the schools, we talked about and thought the public should be invited to attend, so they were. But it was not a public meeting, which would be open to commentary, but it was a meeting held in public. So we had a fishbowl where the focus group was in a large square, and then community members were invited to observe, and about 45 were there. Many board members were there for some or all of the time as well. So, but additionally, given the importance of the topic, the district enlisted the help of a facilitator for the focus group. Todd White, who's been working with the district for over 8 years and knows our district well, he guided the conversation in 3 different phases. And in each of the phases, participants were invited to turn and talk with a partner to identify considerations for the times before, during, and after school if the district were to adjust the school start times. So initially, we went into this thinking that our goal was to develop guiding principles to help the board in its upcoming considerations. But what emerged was a list of items for consideration, along with some guiding principles for us to use and for the board to use in the conversation and decision-making. I've included at your seat, you see it, the outcome of that meeting. I think it's important to understand the list is not meant to be all-inclusive or authoritative in any way, but it does consist of the collective wisdom, experience, and perspective of the participants who are here in the focus group. And so it should be helpful for us. So what I'd like to do just briefly is just touch on a couple of the points that I think are important to consider and maybe could be a springboard into discussion in a little bit once I go through a few more things here. But some of the things that came up before school were questions around waiting for the bus and the time for our students who walk to school or bike to school or walk to school, or walk or bike to school. Stick to the script. We were talking about the acceptable amounts of time for bus rides in the morning for students, and our current bus ride times are there. We're talking about if we were to change school start times, could the district preserve that time and establish parameters around the use of that time with students? Questions came up about the needs of various students. And our current latest start time now is 9:05. And there was a general consensus that from the participants in the focus group that they wouldn't like to start school any later than that. The conversation about during school time, there was consensus around the length of the school day remaining the same. Questions around the schedule itself. Are there things that could be cut or adjusted? Can the schedule itself be adjusted? And then there's some discussion about student wellness and questioning, are there other things the district could or should be doing to help students in this regard? Because ultimately, we talked about the goal is to help our students to be as healthy as possible. That's the overarching purpose of this conversation and all of this work. So there is some brief discussion on such things as reviewing and possibly putting limits on the number of AP classes for students, and then some discussion around the overscheduling of kids in and out of the schools. And then we talked about after school. And as you could imagine, this was the most robust conversation, I think, of the morning. Some of the things that came up were around the latest time for students to arrive at home. Currently, the latest time at East and West, our third tier, the students are getting home around 4:15, 4:20. We talked about homework, the amount of homework, the expectations around all of that. Talked about the possibility of reducing all school commitments. So looking at homework, clubs, sports, schools, parents, and the community, everyone working together to look at how our students are using time outside of the school day and making a collective commitment to making decisions that are centered on helping our students to be healthy. looking at long-term. Our first speaker tonight was talking about that a little bit, right? Trying to get everyone together to understand that, if, for instance, the point came up in the conversation that, could teachers reduce the homework that they give in each class by 10 minutes a night? And teachers looked around and thought, well, perhaps, but simultaneously, would the community commit to not using that newly found time for another purpose, for other scheduling other activities? So that's that's where a partnership would need to be developed, with a focus really on student wellness and making decisions that are best for our students in the long run. There's some conversation about sleep cycles of teens, as came up tonight a little bit, and how the sleep cycle shifts for students, right? And the point around the regenerative sleep being that 5, 6, 7 o'clock in the morning. And then a question around students who have after-school jobs, and a question about the impact of daylight savings time, given that this was back October 24th. It was right around when the clocks were changing at the time. So some questions, some thoughts, some reflections from the focus group. 29 people who got together to have that discussion, and I'll talk in next steps in a little bit about sort of where we go with that. But I want to also share with you that last week, Dr. Krenti and I went to all 5 schools and hosted a meeting with the union presidents as well from across the district. There were 7 meetings in all, and each one was about an hour long, and each one really yielded thoughtful, insightful feedback. In all, I'd anticipate well over 200 staff members joined us for these discussions, and that it did represent the full faculty and staff, mostly faculty, but there were folks from teaching assistants, secretaries, others, who not only attended but participated in the discussion. So it was very rich and meaningful. So I thought I'd take a moment just to share with the board as well some feedback from those conversations. And Dr. Krenti, again, feel free to jump in if I miss anything or what have you. We just have our rough draft of our notes here. But I'll just hit each school and the union presidents, again, just to give you some feedback from the staff. It was quite the endeavor to go to host these 7 meetings and to sneak it in between budget meetings and other things we were doing. So I do want to say thank you certainly to Jill, to Gary, to everybody that participated in both the union meeting and then Jill and I in our road show to all 5 buildings, and also for the staff and the faculty, because these were voluntary meetings. We didn't co-opt a mandatory meeting or anything like that. So they came, they wanted to learn, they wanted to talk, and they felt very grateful to be a part of the process at this point. So, and throughout, both of us were able to reiterate the fact that the board is really looking to make the best decision with the most information possible. So shared with them that we would be sharing with the board their feedback in order to help you guys do that. So at East Elementary, over at East, which was our first meeting, some of the questions that arose, and you're going to hear some repeats because I think it's important to know also that when questions were repeated across different buildings, there's gives it a little more importance. So over at East, some of the questions they asked: have you considered putting the 3 elementary schools on the same schedule? Have you considered putting SACs on the same tier? They're asked about what does the research say about elementary students? And then have you taken into consideration the time we would release students for early dismissal on a snow day? Just like the focus group was close on the heels of daylight savings time, or actually it was just before that. These meetings were after the Thursday of the snowstorm that caught everybody by surprise. And so that was an important question for them. Some of the feedback and comments that I thought could be helpful from East were elementary age students, the K1, are really pretty exhausted after 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And 3rd and 4th graders really begin to lose their focus after 3. All groups do better in the morning. They comment was that they feel it'd be important to keep the 3 elementary schools as close as possible in whatever configuration that is developed. They shared with us many of the students are pulled out early to get to their after-school activities now with a 3:35 dismissal. And there was great concern about what could happen if that dismissal was made later. They also were questioning about if we were to separate the tiers further by putting South, say, in the 1st tier and East and West out in the 3rd, the town after-school programs, would they still start at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, or might they start even earlier, which would, again, contribute to the issue of students being pulled out too frequently. Next, we met with our union presidents, and they were the presidents from the TAs, food service, teachers, secretaries. Custodians weren't there, so we did catch up with them otherwise. But some of those questions, again, can SACs go on one tier? So can we put them all together at once instead of having to split the 5th and 6th off from the 7th and 8th? Will contracts need to be reopened in order to accommodate a longer day? For example, there's a clause in one of the contracts where the day ends at 2:30. So if that day had to go longer, we'd have to look at opening up the contracts. Have we considered scheduling changes that could help students get more sleep? And their last question was, how can we review or talk about or address screen time with students? Some of the feedback was around coaching, as Hank shared with us tonight, and a concern about the clubs and activities for students and the elementary school students. How late could they go? Would they go till 5? What would that look like for staff who are running those clubs? Over at West, which again you'll recall is on the 3rd tier, so similar to East, some of their questions again were, have you considered putting the 3 elementary schools on the same schedule? And they were questioning, what does the research say about elementary schools? When is the ideal time for those kids? What does that look like? And then they shared with us what they believe is their ideal time, which I'll get to in a bit. Have we examined all the other factors that impact students, overscheduling, homework, other expectations? And how do we assure the hours used for sleep and not something else? And then a question about, have we thought about high school students who have jobs after school? Again, comments from West School faculty a bit. Elementary students are developmentally winding down and done at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So that's similar to what we heard over at East. And that's because they shared, and same at East, they shared the same thing. Elementary age students are up early in the morning, so the best time for them emotionally and academically is in the morning. So at both of those schools, they really work hard to schedule their academics in the morning before lunch. And then after lunch, they do other activities where they can. If South were to get out at 2:30, have we looked at whether the YMCA would be prepared to take those students? Because they're running a pre-K program there at that point. Statement about keeping the 3 schools as close as possible. A statement about students who are picked up early for after-school activities now, and how they are disruptive to class. And there we go from West. Over at the high school, they were wondering if people have been communicating with Greenwich about their change and how that's worked, and asking about other options to help our students. Homework demands, number of AP classes, limiting sport or play practices. Have we looked at all of those things in consideration of student wellness? A question also about how do we ensure kids are using the time for sleep? And questions about numbers of missed classes. It's a wonderful thing here at the high school. Our students don't like to miss classes. Again, I remember as a high school principal trying to form leadership groups and other things. And if the students had a class that conflicted with the time you're scheduling, they didn't want to come out. So what does that look like? And then wondering about staff at the schools that have changed, getting feedback directly from them. There's a concern at the high school about reducing class time and the challenges that would present for our students without having to reduce the curricular expectations and the outcomes that we currently have. And then teachers who coach, some questions about that. Over at South, question again about what's the research say about the elementary school students. So that's some research that we're going to be doing to be able to answer that question for them. South asked again, have we looked at putting SACs on the same tier and the 3 elementary schools on the same tier? So all 3 of our elementary schools shared that hope, or at least question about, is there a schedule out there somewhere that we could put the 3 elementaries on the same tier? And it would be beneficial for lots of reasons. How do we assure kids are getting more sleep? And then just some comments, feedback from them. Their question about school. If school were to start at South at 7:30 in the morning, students would be waiting for buses in the dark, and a concern about that and the impact it would have on the walkers. Over at South, we have a strong culture of walkers, which is something that Joanne really works to promote. At Saks, at the high school, we've got a lot of kids who ride their bikes in as well. And as we see, the more bike racks we put up, thanks to the generosity of the PTC, the more bikes fill them. It's pretty amazing. Question about tardies with an earlier start. And then would South need an early bird program if it were to go much later? And then we ended the tour over at Saks. And we started with the upper division where they asked, is 15 minutes enough, if we're going to look at a significant change? And how significant of a change are you thinking about? Again, a question about how do you protect the morning time? And then the lower division asked again, how do you protect the morning time? And have you considered alternative schedules for high school students? Either something different start or end times or doing something with the scheduling. I will say South and Saks, lower division, both resoundingly agreed that they have the best schedule in the district and the best schedule for kids. And it is sort of a golden time, right? It's 8:15, 8:20 in the morning. So the kids are able to walk, they're able to ride, they get in right at that time. So, I mean, we're still sort of compiling all of this together in order to make meaning, but I wanted to share that with you tonight because, again, it might lead to a question on your part or a suggestion or a thought or other things. What we've been looking at as well, in going and talking with the staff and talking to each other and talking to other districts and continually learning and thinking about all of this, we're looking to develop a solution that works for all of our students, right? To try to do something that advantages all of them. So by going around and thinking about, say, again, all 3 elementaries on the same tier, that there wasn't a scenario anywhere because of the limitation over at Saks and the facility limit, the ability the inability to get all the buses there at the same time. So we asked the next question. So what if? What if we did something else? What if we looked deeper at it? What if we staged the buses? What if we did, just took a different approach to it? So we keep looking and thinking and questioning about things like that. But really thinking about how do we come up with, what does the solution look like where all students are advantaged, not one over the other? So for instance, would be one that would not be good would be to push all of our elementaries late, right? Because they're saying they want the early time is better, but they don't necessarily want the 7:30 because that's really not a great time given the dynamics. And so how do we make all these pieces work? That's what we're working to try to do. It's not easy, but we've got really good people thinking and reflecting and talking and just brainstorming different pieces. So is there a 2-tier solution that groups all the elementaries first, and then the high school and Saks second? What might that look like? What might have to happen at Saks? What might the flow be? What might the traffic look like? So what we've done with Mark and his team is commission a traffic study. They're going to look at the high school and sort of what it takes to get out of the high school and the timing. They're going to look at Saks and look at what this might take in order to pull this off. The board had asked a question when Mark was here before about had he looked at putting East and West in the first tier, and he gave somewhat of an answer. But then he and I had been communicating afterwards to say really what he should have said, and he thought about it on his drive home, was really talked more about they rarely put the elementaries on the first tier because driving elementary students home in the afternoon, a lot can go wrong. We can take students to a house. If nobody's there to take that student off the bus, for the little kids, then you drive them back to the school. It takes longer for students to get on and off the buses in the elementary. It takes longer to load the elementary buses and to disembark the elementary. So you have to spread that time out a little bit more when you have the elementary in a first tier. But counter to that, as we were processing it, was that might be a sacrifice, you want to call it that, we're willing to make to put Saks on the last tier and maybe do split shift dismissals where they're close in time, but not exactly the same time, so that nobody's waiting for the buses to get back from Saks. So if we were to go to a 2-tier solution, so we're looking at that. We are also looking at scheduling options. We just today I spoke to another district who is looking to change their high school schedule significantly and to kind of reap some benefits around that, both with instructional hours, time in class, and other things. I think there are schedule solutions out there that we are continuing to look at and explore. Palo Alto, for instance, is an example of a school district that changed their high school schedule to help sort of reduce the pressure, the stress that students feel every day. So we're looking nationally as well at some of the things happening. But open mind to all of it. So what our next steps are, I mentioned the traffic study that's underway. We've also been working, we've developed a very brief student survey that simply looks to capture what students do from the end of the day at 2:05 to the beginning of school the following day at 7:30. So how have you spent that time? I'm talking with Bill and Dave now about how best to administer that for our 7 through 12 students. But the idea is that it's something you would do a couple of times over the course of a month or so to try to sort of paint a picture of how our students are using their time. I think it'll change. So for instance, if we did it right now, it really wouldn't be the most accurate thing because other than football, we're pretty much in between sports for a lot of our kids. So they wouldn't be spending their time in practice necessarily. But we still want to capture this time now, knowing when it is, and then capture it again when sports are in season, capture it again when maybe students are preparing for a performance, things like that, to try to really get an understanding of how our students are using that time, again, from 2:05 to 7:30 the next day. We are also continuing, as I mentioned, to explore scheduling options, to look at transportation options and different ideas that are around that, to keep our conversations going and to follow up with surrounding districts. Right now, again, we've mentioned Greenwich, we've mentioned Newtown. Those are the two that have made adjustments to their schedule. I've met with the Newtown superintendent already to talk about it a bit, and I have another meeting scheduled soon. Ralph and I were on the phone even today, having conversation about different things. Ralph's the superintendent down in Greenwich. So keeping those conversations going and continuing to learn, from their experiences. And then what we're looking to do as well is, and probably it will be early next week, just given the demands, because we are in budget season as well, we're going to invite folks to get together for a follow-up conversation. We've got a lot more information now. We've had some of the feedback from the focus groups. I think people have had some time to reflect and think about things. So we're looking at pulling together building district, administrators, teachers, parents from all levels. Certainly we'll be reaching out to folks who are actively engaged in this and really thinking deeply about it, to get together and to have a conversation about it and to kind of share and think together and learn together and try to keep things moving forward. The other piece of other handout that you have that I thought could be helpful, again, for a conversation that comes from some of the questions from around Mark's presentation. We looked at our Durg A schools and also looked at Greenwich to identify the instructional hours for students. We found the start and end times for each of their schools and then the length of their school day. I know that's been part of the conversation as well a bit. So you'll see the instructional hours are back from 16-17 because it's just the most recent information that's available online. And essentially what they do in determining instructional hours, it's not just a function of the length of the school day, it's also a function of the schedule, so the master schedule. It's the amount of time that students are in classes, not in school. So if you have recess, for instance, if one school has a recess that's 20 minutes, one has a recess that's 4 hours, your instructional times will be very different, although they're in school that same amount of time. So there's a calculation that goes into all of that, and it's reported to the state. But it gives you, I want to give you, again, just some data for points of comparison and or discussion around any of that. I'll stop talking, but just to share that, our goal is not to take the easy path in this. When we do things, we really work hard to try to do them the right way. So we're taking a thoughtful and deliberate approach to doing this, being as inclusive as we can be, trying to consider everything so that we can lead the district forward to the best solution here. We don't want to be in a situation where we put something forward that's expedient but not wise. We're just trying to do this in a way that helps all of our kids. We are wholeheartedly committed as a district, I know you are as a board, to students, to student wellness. We've dedicated our lives and our careers to doing this work, and we want to do the best that we can for the 4,200 students that we have coming to our schools every day. And that's why we're engaged in this and doing this work the best that we can. So if I missed anything, Dr. Parenti, you're welcome to jump in. Otherwise,
Thank you, Dr. Lutzy. I think you highlighted a lot of the complex issues that need to be explored and examined just so that we can make the right decision. Any questions or comments?
I just
Deanna?
have a question on the sheet. So I'm reading it and I see like the Reading, Easton Reading district, and they have more. Their length of school day is longer by 15 minutes. But if I compare South to Samuel Staples, they have fewer instructional hours, even though they have more their length of day is longer.
Sure.
Why is that?
Well, there, as I mentioned, there are a couple of different things that go into that.
Okay.
One would be, as you know, we have 182 days of school. So if they do 180 days,
Okay.
then their instruction hours might be later,
Okay.
made less. But it's also a function of the master schedule in the school. So for instance, if they had 2 recesses and we had 1 recess, then it's not time in the school building, it's actually classroom time, instructional hours receiving
So
instruction.
gym does not count, or, I mean,
Well, PE.
recess doesn't count.
Thank you.
Recess
There's a
doesn't
big
count.
difference, yes.
PE
Recess would not
counts.
count.
PE
Lunch would
counts.
not count.
Right, okay.
You know, it's times in class with a certified teacher receiving instruction.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Sure.
Sherry?
So, Brian, I think you successfully demonstrated the complexity of this issue, and I think we all agree that we need to take a purposeful and deliberate approach, and that I think we all agree as well that, you know, the focus needs to be on student wellness and reaching the best and right decision for our students. And I know this is complicated and there's a ton of work, but there's also been a request just for a timeline, and I do think that's a reasonable request, and I think, for example, at this point, there are some parents who are deducing from the last meeting's presentation that this can't happen in the 1920 school year. But that's something they're deducing versus us kind of, you know, putting out there. And I just think that I would encourage us as a board to kind of put a timeline around this, because I think communicating that as an expectation would be helpful to all stakeholders.
Sure, and as Jill and I went around to the schools, that question came up every single time. And in truth, and another thing that you have just for reference is just a 1-pager of Mark's presentation. The answer that we shared with the staff around the question was, you know, timeline it does depend upon the magnitude of the change, if there's going to be one. For instance, if it were an option where we started school 15 minutes later, then that could happen soon. You know, our runs would be the same. The buses are generally the same. It's the same bus count for the most part. So that's the low magnitude change. If it's to go to 2 tiers and a 2-tier solution, that's the most magnitude of change. That would take some time to not only do the internal work, but do the external work of buying the buses, hiring the drivers, training the drivers, you know, doing all of what it takes to do that. So there is a part that's dependent upon the magnitude of the change. So that's the implementation timeline. The decision timeline is probably a different conversation. And I think that we are continuing to sort of learn and to explore different possible options. I leave it, if the board has a strong feeling about a specific date, timeline, then certainly, you know, we'll be glad to work within that. I would caution, though, that a neighboring district about a year and a half ago had done that, has said that by a certain date, they were going to change their start time and their schools would be starting later. And they just recently chose to kind of rescind that vote and give themselves a little bit more time around this. And I don't know where it's going to go. They don't know where that's going to go. But, you know, I think that's tough on a community and on a staff to sort of say that we're going to do something and they start to anticipate kind of a date around that. And, you know, it's not us, not the administration necessarily, but for the faculty and those that are trying to organize lives and thinking about a whole bunch of things. I just don't want to be in that situation is all. So it's been my goal to try to bring as much information forward as possible, try to answer as many questions as possible, and try to lead the board and others to asking as many questions that come to mind. But again, I leave it to you guys.
The way I kind of think about the timeline is, I mean, number one, we should constantly be evaluating and reevaluating these sorts of issues, because it's what we're supposed to be doing, is optimizing the school district. So I don't think there's ever an end time. As it relates to the decision for next year, I think the obvious decision point is when we're doing our budget, because if there's any, you know, significant impact other than just moving things back 15 minutes, we need to consider that in the budget. If we sort of roll the clock forward and want to make a change next year and it's something other than 15 minutes, I think the answer is it's probably not happening next year because of the complexity associated with making a significant transportation change. Why don't I just pause there? Does everybody, any comments on that?
You might say.
There's been a lot of talk also about, like, the guy that was here was like, if you guys have additional options, like, I'm happy to go back and, work with it, and, all the recommendations about the different tiers, and you even talked about potentially something with, like, scheduling at the high school, and, budget is gonna be a big deal. It's gonna be a big deal this year, absolutely. And like 15 minutes, I've asked all my kids, and they're like, 15 minutes is nothing. I'm like, well, it's 15 minutes more of sleeping. But like, I don't know. Is it something? Is 15 minutes something? It's no cost change, but I'm not sure if that's really what everyone's seeking. I don't know, but we would need, is there any other?
Yeah, so.
I don't know.
I'm gonna give you my hamster quote. So I saw a quote that just kind of resonated for me, and it was, don't confuse activity with progress. We want to make sure that if there's a change, that it really meets the goal of student wellness, right? So that comes to mind around the 15-minute piece. So after going and meeting with the buildings, specifically the elementaries, sort of looping those teachers into the conversation and this idea around the 3 elementaries all at the same time, I did pick up the phone, called Mark. We had a long conversation about it. Went through pros and cons of those things, but then I asked him to really take a good look at it. And we rolled it into the idea around the traffic study to see if that's possible. I think Dave, I know the staff there, the others over at Saks would love to be on one bell schedule.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be great for being able to share staff, to do other things over there. So is there a possibility there? We don't know, but we'll let people who sort of do transportation the way that Mark does give us some feedback about it. What would it take? And that's kind of a little bit of a reframing of my thinking, and thinking that whatever comes forward should advantage every one of our kids. So is there a way to do that? And if he says no, then okay, and we'll let him tell us why, and then we'll challenge that too and see where we go with it. But again, these came forward, these 4 options, just to move the conversation into that realm, right? We're having this conversation, I think, tonight, and the community's having the conversation because now we have something to base it on, with the general understanding that, we do believe, and this is all the faculty conversations we had, all of where we went with everybody was, we do believe sleep is vital for our kids and for all of us, for adults, for kids. There is, we know that. We see it, we read it, we know that there's sort of a culture of the less sleep you get, the tougher you are. That's detrimental to us, it's detrimental to our kids. So we want to create a system that is most advantageous for all of our kids. And so we bounce that idea around, and they're going to take a look at the Saks facility, they're going to look at here at the high school and getting buses off. We're talking about other options, even with the town, around exits out of the high school. There's a bottleneck on Farm. Is there any way to do anything else with that? Is there any way to put in a different exit somewhere, in the back of the school? So we're having, all of those kinds of conversations to try to develop. Again, it's not the most expedient. Expedient's important, but we need the best possible solution, and that's we're trying to generate that based on everything that we're learning and everything we know.
So, go ahead, Penny.
So, in terms of a timeline, do we have any idea from Mark about when he might get back to us about whether or not it'd be possible to do the elementary, middle school, high school on each on their own tier?
That was actually
Or keeping
a
all
2-tier solution. So it wasn't, that was going to 2 tiers, so you would have all 3 elementaries on 1 tier, and then students 5 through 12 on another tier. Because you wouldn't necessarily want to put the high school on its own tier, because they don't use as many buses as the middle school, for instance. So there's an efficiency piece to that. But for that being said, he's looking at it now, and we're scheduling the time with Lou, his partner, to come out and take a look at everything. I anticipate it'll be soon.
So I guess the only thing I'd say with the high school is, it looks to me, what's incredible about looking at these options is, if you look at option 3, to just try and basically scrape together 5 minutes, whatever, just to keep the bus pickup times a little bit later, if you put south early, it's $295,000. So none of these options all of them have a cost. And I'm not quite sure how much time we pick up with that option, but looks to me like we really should explore how many minutes we can pick up if we do the high school drop off and pick up differently, and be creative about it, and look at that back entrance. I drove it today, and there's basically a road, and I don't know if it could be used or not used, what a traffic consultant would say, or how you would switch where people park. But there's that road. I mean, other things that have occurred to me, could you just all of a sudden have a moratorium on people leaving while the buses go out? And how would we do that? All the things are disruptive, but each one of these solutions is disruptive. So I think we need to, if we can somehow pick up even 5 minutes somewhere along the way. I mean, there's a lot of pressure on not making the last pickup, the last bell in the school later than 3:35, I know, because of the commuting. So.
Well, because of the students and what they do after school and their time that they get home.
Exactly. So I'm just thinking if we can, figure out ways that cost a little bit of money to be more efficient, that might give us more flexibility with these different options.
That's
Sure.
agreed.
So I agree with Penny that we need to look at those options, but I do want to just go back to the timeline, and I agree that I would never want to commit to any change. We're not even close to making that decision. But for example, I do think to put a timeline around the decision-making process would be helpful. And for example, you ticked off some important next steps, the traffic study, the student survey, a scheduling option analysis. So, I would advocate that we put a timeline around those key next steps to guide us through our decision-making process. So that again, I just think that, given the feedback we've gotten from stakeholders, I think it's essential that we communicate a timeline to help with expectations. So not that we're making a change or that we're even close to deciding, what the answer is going to be, but that would be my position.
Can I just make maybe one suggestion, which is that we get, maybe it's every other meeting, that we get an update on where we are in the process in terms of evaluating. And then, we can talk about, dates for a specific decision point, but I think if we actually, every 2 meetings, we're talking about this issue, whether it's a traffic study, having a presentation on that, talking about scheduling options during the day, length of the day, we'll then have an opportunity to say, okay, we've now heard enough and we can make a decision, versus we set an arbitrary date today, and we could do that, set an arbitrary date today, at some point in the reasonably near future, to say we must make a decision by this date, which we can obviously also change if we wanted to in the future. Penny?
Well, I guess my thought on that is that there are two points, right? And we need to vote on the budget. I think it's January 22nd, 21st?
Ballpark.
Whatever.
22nd,
It's Monday,
yeah.
22nd,
22nd,
whatever the
because
date
Martin
is.
Luther King Day is 21st, yep.
We need to vote on, we're voting on a budget. Unless we happen to go with the current or option 2, they all have a financial consequence. So we as a board, that's
Right, that's one decision point.
That's one
Yeah.
decision point right there. If we want to do anything by that point, if we're able to get the information to do anything by that
And that's for next
point.
year.
For next year.
Right.
So I don't know where we are on that timeline, if it's possible for us to get enough information in order to make that decision by the end of January. And if we can't, then obviously we have a little bit more time and a little bit more, we don't have to compress everything so much. But I'd like some, there's a lot, anyhow, that's, the schedule's
Yeah.
sort of running, toward that goalpost. And if we, as a board, want to do something by that point, things that we could do outside of that point might involve scheduling changes that wouldn't have as big a financial ramification. But I'm not even sure about that, because things seem to always get down to dollars and cents. So that's what I'm looking at. That's our
Right, that's our
current-
decision point, is in
Right.
January. And then, and we'll be deciding, do we want to do something significant, insignificant, or nothing? What's the associated cost? And then, depending upon what we decide at that point, We may say we can't do anything because we don't have enough information. We haven't studied X, Y, Z. We don't have enough information on traffic, or scheduling or something else. But that's a decision point. We'll make a decision in January.
Right. So I guess my question is, when can Mark get us this next round of information, or better, do you
I have to
any
connect with
idea?
him and ask him. It's a site visit, it's interviews. I think it's probably a 2-week process. Once he gets it all going, I have to slot it into the other work that they're doing. That's what we're looking to do. So as soon as I have his dates, I'll let you know. He'll probably want to talk to some of you.
Tom?
Just to follow up on Sherry's point as far as the timeline, if we take it away from the idea of making a hard decision, I think the board could come up with a timeline for recommendation to move forward on an option. Once we make that recommendation, we could understand the consequences as far as a budget, as far as time of execution, and then determine, a decision point where we actually move forward on execution. But I think if we tie ourselves to a calendar year budget, it's going to be very difficult for us year after year after year to come forward and make that kind of decision, rather than just simply moving forward on a timeline to make a recommendation as a board.
Any other comments, Maria?
I think from what I'm hearing from parents, they have a lot of suggestions, even some outright, alternatives to the transportation study. People have a lot of different ideas. It was mentioned having a subcommittee, and I know we were going to have one. I would like to have a subcommittee. I think the board should put together a subcommittee for this issue. And we can't have all the meeting information right here, but we would need a structure where we can hear the input, feedback. We don't have to wait, for, I feel like we need more information. Even just listening to the feedback from all the teachers, I would have liked to have maybe gone to the meeting and heard those meetings to kind of hear firsthand what the issues are. So, I'd like to make a motion that we form a subcommittee for a late start time.
Could I just make one comment? I guess I could ask, is there a second to the motion before?
I second that motion.
Okay. Any discussion?
Well,
Penny?
Well,
Yeah.
I'd actually like to know exactly what the deliverables of that committee would be at this time. And that, to me, is the type of committee where I think that maybe if we decide that we're past this budget cycle and we want to, we want to move this back a year, then we have the time to set up the committee. But, the one thing that I think has been good about our process is that we've done all this in public. So there have been no conversations. I'm actually looking at my fellow board members, and I really have no idea what you all are thinking about, which of these options you like or don't like. So, and I think that is good in that I think we're all still trying to gather the facts. In terms of having a committee and getting any useful feedback that's going to be helpful to us before the end of the January deadline, I just don't see that happening. I think that we need to continue to have public input. And if we decide not to do anything in January, then maybe we want to revisit that. But I think putting together a quick committee right now, I just don't think we'd get any useful information. I think we'd sidetrack our ability to do anything this year if we wanted to. So that would be my thought about timing for a committee.
Yeah.
I would just, I would sort of echo Penny's comment that whenever we've set up a committee, it's a very specific purpose. There are dates and deadlines of how long it's going to last, and who, we have a structure for creating committees, and we don't just do it on the fly at a board meeting. So I think if we were to even consider that, it's not something that's done with a motion at an open board meeting. There has to be a lot of work put in behind the scenes to create it. So I would echo what you said. And I do think that there is, while it's maybe frustrating for people. I think that, it is all out in the open, everything that's being discussed, everything that you're doing, everything that's, we're not, nothing's behind closed doors. Everybody is hearing, we're all hearing the same thing at the same time. Nobody's ahead of anybody else, so.
And can I also, I think I might speak for the board and just to thank all the parents that came to our last meeting and spoke out publicly, and all the parents that are here today. We are listening to you. We read the emails. We appreciate your input. And that is one of the reasons we're taking so long with this process. So we do feel like you're included in the process, maybe not as much as you want to be. But I think it's really important that you have come and you've spoken, and it's an important decision we're making.
And I also wanted to add, like, I know I've just been hearing from parents, like, that they think that we're not doing anything, and I know how much you have been working on this. It's just, I guess maybe we aren't making, I know that we've talked about it a little bit in our agenda planning, that we need just to be like, kind of like the timeline. It just needs to be spoken about more often in our meetings, because I know you're working on it, and I ask you, and you're like, oh yeah, like I just, the traffic consultant was, but nobody else knows that that's going on in the background, except, until last week and today. So I think it is important, whether it's a timeline, whether it's transparency, just to let parents know, like, we're not just sitting on this and not doing anything. Like, we're working on it, and, and again, like what Penny said, like, I really, like, after last week, I didn't know one option. I didn't know anything. So that was the first time I saw it last week, the same as all of you. So, and we are looking at, I've got 3 kids there, and we talk about it every day, pretty much. My son the other day was like, oh, do they have a meeting today? And it must have been after your meeting, because the teacher that met with you had a whole discussion in the class about what the kids thought and what they do with their free time. So they're talking about it. Everyone's talking about it.
And when we pull people together, again, whether it's the end of this week or early next week, that's certainly one of the things we can go through in the beginning is sort of here's what got us to where we are. Here's the thinking about kind of next steps and other information and ways to gather those that feedback from folks in order to continue to bring it all forward and to hear from people, to hear ideas from people and other thoughts. And certainly the board will be well aware of when that meeting is and where it is, and certainly invited to attend and participate, as decision makers and all of that. It's that will be a public meeting. And so it's meant to be open for everybody. What I said when Mark started, just as part of his introduction, was, this has been a generative process. Right? I envy the people who know the end result already and then just work backwards to get everybody else there. This isn't one of those things. This is much more, to me, much more complex than that. And I think that while generative processes are messy and, I'll use another word, constructivist, right? You're sort of building it as you're going to try to figure all of this out. They yield the best results. And so what we're working really hard to do is not take what is a complex adaptive problem around teen sleep and student wellness and say, here's a technical solution that's going to fix it and put it in place and walk away. This is also part of what's happening here is people are getting engaged in that next level of conversation about some of those things. That's why I wanted to share them with you in part. People are thinking about, hey, what about the stresses that are on students around numbers of AP classes, expectations outside of the school day? What is all of the 24 hours of student life look like? What are our homework expectations? How are we communicating those things out? You'll see in the when we do budget assumptions, talk about the LMS, hearing that even brought up with teachers a bit to say, hey, if we put something like this in place, if students are spending 10 minutes looking for their homework online, that's 10 minutes that they save by going here and being able to find this and do it. So we're engaged in the broader conversation, at least beginning to be, that's a lot more than, bus transportation pieces. It has to do with our kids and their health. So I think that's an important outcome of, what is by design a messy process.
Penny?
So just one of the things I'd like some more input on, and I think the teachers at the elementary schools mentioned it as well, is what is the impact or what is the research if you put, say, an elementary school K through, 4 with a 7:30 or a 7:45 a.m. start time.
Mhm.
And what is that showing? That's option 3 and then option 4.
Mhm.
And, is that something that we should consider?
Yeah, and that's research we're actually looking to do now, because if that two-tier solution that I talked about with the 3 elementaries going first and then 5 through 12 going second, that we would probably be about a 7:40 start or so for that first tier. So what does that mean? What does the research say around all of that? And so that's what we're gathering. Mhm. Yep. I don't know, and that's how these processes go. We're learning.
Jen?
So I just had a question. So as far as like things that we're going to be touching upon in the future, I guess this traffic study is huge. The scheduling, you spoke quickly about a follow-up conversation next week or something, or like are you?
Yeah, we're looking to pull together staff, parents, board members, other interested
Like
folks
another
to get
roundtable
together.
thing like you had here?
Yeah,
or?
less a focus group this time, more an open discussion, and we'll have to decide around facilitation and what that looks like and what the outcomes are. But it's one of the ways one of the outcomes I have going into it, 2 of them actually are, 1, to communicate sort of process up to this point, and 2, to receive feedback from folks and ideas and thoughts and better understand from all stakeholders.
And maybe even like, like he said, like doing all the elementary schools in the same tier. And again, like I'd be interested to see what parents K through 4 would think about their kids going to school super early too. Because I mean, I don't know
we're
about that
thinking
either,
of it a little bit, like we were able to go to all 5 of the buildings and have those 7 different meetings because we have a captive audience, right? It takes a little bit longer to pull
Right.
parents together. But we want to do that, and we want to share where we are, and we want to receive questions, feedback, thoughts, and, be able to make sure. We learned a lot and really appreciated all of the time the teachers and the faculty staff gave to us to
Right.
share those different perspectives. This
Right.
whole idea around the elementary on the same tier, and this idea that if you put one elementary at 7:30 in the morning and the other start at 9:05, there are issues with that, both, sort of scheduling or what have you, but is there an equity piece? Is the 7:30 student, is that student advantaged over the students who start at 9:05 if he or she's getting sort of a full educational, instructional day because of that early start, and our other guys are sort of fading out later in the day, in the afternoon?
Right.
Is there an equity issue there? There may be. So I think that was important thing. That was an important consideration that we heard at both of the late start elementaries.
Could you talk, Brian, just a little bit about what you mean by scheduling versus, start times?
Sure.
Just so people understand.
Yeah, sure.
Great.
So when I talk about, right, because you could easily say, well, this is scheduling, right, when we go.
Yeah.
So we talk about scheduling, I think about the master schedule within a building. So that's sort of when do classes happen, how many classes meet in a day, how long are those classes, how does everything get scheduled? Our current schedule at the high school, students schedule up to 8 blocks. One of them generally, at least, is for a science lab and PE and health and other things like that. But there's 8 blocks that can be scheduled. 7 of them meet a day. 1 of them drops, and there's a morning and an afternoon rotation. So that's what we've been doing here for a long time. Is that the best use of our time with our students? There are different models out there that are worth looking at. There's pros and cons to every schedule. But is there something we can do within that master schedule, for instance, that could meet the goal around student wellness and student health by providing options for kids? One of the challenges in the rotating and dropping schedule is that you could have a morning, say a second period study hall, for instance, but it's only going to be once every 8 days that falls first period that you could then use that as an opportunity to sleep, to come into school later. If you have a study hall and it's in the afternoon rotation, it'll never happen in the morning. It would happen at the end of the day, once every 8 days or so, where you could go. So it's, our current schedule doesn't really lead us to meeting the goal around student wellness in the right way, or in the way that we're talking about. There's some good things to it, but it doesn't necessarily get us there. So are there ways that we can adjust that schedule, different changes we can make? There are, as I said, models all over about different things, and we have expanded our research to look across the country. There's lots of really good models here in Connecticut. And there's others that, we've talked about around the Chicago area. We've talked a little bit about out in California, other high-performing districts. How are they using their time within the school day? And so that's what we're taking a look at.
Okay, great, thanks. Other questions, comments? Yep. Hazel?
Turn on her mic, Jen.
I think it's terrific that we're looking at so many things about the different pieces of them. And as you're thinking about the one that you've just talked about changing the schedule, and what the timing and what schedule works the best, or the one that's the most effective, everybody's pleased, I think that should be a little part of our research, if we could, to see what's happened to various schedules, the way all the groups feel. Not just the parents, not just the students, not just the teachers, but all of them, so that we could get an idea, some profiles of where there's been success. And we have to define what success is. I'm not sure if that's something on everybody's mind. It would be interesting if we each put down what success would be. And parents also, because we may not agree on that, on what success is. For some people, it'll be success they're sleeping. Finally, temper tantrums have stopped. And it's been a peaceful home. I think that's a big success thing for many people. But it may be for other people making sure that they're doing better on the generalized test to get into the top colleges. I think those are conversations we need to add to some of this discussion. Not heavy, fast, I think, but they'd be important.
Thank you.
I mean, maybe sorry, Maria, go ahead.
I just I wanted to throw it out there that I think it's probably a good idea to consider even a different schedule for high school, considering they leave high school and they go to a 15-hour-a-week college. They're expected to be more self-directed when they're younger. So, do we actually need to have a 6.5-hour day at the high school? So I think you said one of the teachers, or that came up in one of the teacher meetings, having a different, is there a way to just condense the student day at the high school level to get some time back? So that it seems to me that after school's the biggest problem, high school sports.
Yeah, there was a question that came up at SACS about a staggered day. Right? Could you do something for the high school to choose? And there was a question or concern actually that came up from the high school teachers of if they shortened the instructional time that they have with students, that they would have to make significant changes and curricular changes, and they felt like they'd have to lower some expectations around that. That was the high school feedback on it. But yeah, there were some. But again, in our, I agree with the schedule piece. There's pros and cons from every schedule. If you have 7 classes meeting a day, that means you spend a lot of time in the hallway. Because each passing period is 5 minutes long, so that adds up over the course of time. And this goes to the instructional hours question. So that time's not counted towards your instructional hours because you're walking from class to class. Other schedules with fewer transitions in the day allow you to recapture more time in the classroom. Can you make an adjustment around that?
Like a block scheduling kind of.
Things like that, yep.
So maybe I'd just suggest that to continue moving things forward, that at least every other meeting, we just have an update on, where we are with respect to scheduling and traffic and, all of these issues. And then obviously we'll make a decision as it relates to next year when we talk about the budget in January.
I will also commit to certainly every other meeting, as you say, but also if there is something new that's come or other things as they arrive, we won't wait.
Right.
So we'll bring everything forward, but we'll be sure that no less frequently than every other meeting.
Great, perfect. That's great. And then I think going forward, Sherry?
Well, I was also going to just suggest that we think about having a public forum where we can share all the information on this topic, because I think right now there's a lot of different information cycles out there, and I think it would be we would be best served if we took control of the information cycle and made sure, there's a lot of different handouts and analysis and more to come, but if we can,
Sort of create a
condensed
repository.
presentation.
yeah, whether it's on the website or, just
Right.
kind of like budget notes,
Yeah.
but making sure we've got a place that parents can go to get up-to-date information on this topic.
Makes sense.
That's good.
So-
Sorry.
No? Okay, great.
One more
Thank you.
thing, Brendan.
Yeah.
I think we have to vote.
Sorry?
We have an open motion on the floor.
Oh, sorry. All those in favor? the motion?
The motion?
Sorry, yes.
Jen, your mic's on.
So, is there any type of committee that, on this now? There is, correct?
There-
Like, I
we
mean,
don't-
there's you and Jill, I mean, like, what, is there a current committee now?
We don't have a board subcommittee.
Not a board,
No.
but like, is there any, like, are the key, there's no committee right now? You have no,
So the administrative team has been sort of working with Mark, working through, communicating out, doing research, meeting with folks, and doing all that, and then really gathering the information together to share with the board. You know, a committee would presuppose in a way that it would be making recommendations, right? And we haven't gotten to the point where we've collected enough information and had enough options and other things to make a recommendation. You know, right now, I wouldn't recommend anything that's on this Mark's table, right?
Right.
I don't think the right solution exists yet.
Right.
So we're still exploring and we're still trying to gather as much information as we can to bring forward.
right?
I also think having a subcommittee personally would slow it down because the subcommittee would have to go and do their work and then report back. We'd all have to learn what the subcommittee learned, and then we'd probably have our own questions, multiple meetings.
Well, I
and
know
then
that's
have
how
to
it
make a
works with our
decision.
other subcommittees currently. Like, we get,
So
and you work, and I know you've been working
Well,
with
in
Karen
this, I
and
mean, what we've
certain-
been looking to do, I'm sorry to
No,
jump in
go ahead.
again, but what we've been looking to do is really bring the information to the board as a committee of the whole. Right, so there's nothing here that, there's nothing I have that I haven't brought forward. There's nothing that is sort of waiting in the wings. There's nothing that magic solution's not out there and just waiting to come back. So everything we've got and all the information we've brought forward to the board at a board meeting as a committee of the whole. With a subcommittee, then that information would go to that subcommittee and then work through the subcommittee and come to the board from the subcommittee.
Right.
So it's a change in process. Pro
I mean,
and cons, you know, it
yeah.
doesn't necessarily make too much of a difference from our end. I mean, we're going to keep doing the work that we're doing, but instead of bringing it to the full board, we would bring that information to the subcommittee.
Right. I mean, personally, just how things work currently, like I mean, I don't always know what's going on in the resource committee and this committee. Like, I mean, as long as we can keep it very transparent and more consistent, and we have public forums and we have parent involvement, like, I personally would rather have this type of discussion, you know, but making sure that we're also including, you know, the parents. But I mean, I know that you've been speaking a lot with Karen and
Oh, yeah, all the PTC and PFA
Right,
presidents, we talk,
right.
every time we meet, we talk about it a little bit and back and forth.
Okay, so a vote on the motion.
Could I ask one more
Maria,
question?
yes.
Before the vote. So the first meeting with parents was the fishbowl. The meeting with teachers, was that a fishbowl type meeting too?
No, the meeting with teachers was going around to each of the buildings in an open forum with the teachers.
So that next meeting with parents would be more of an open forum? That's it.
Yep.
Okay, any other questions? Yes.
I'm sorry,
Bonnie?
I'm not trying to be a stickler about this, but I honestly think that if we want to have a vote on this tonight, it should be more that people are in favor of the concept of a committee, because we spent a really long time as a board a number of years ago creating, for a lot of good reasons, creating rules about the way we would go about creating subcommittees. And before the board is actually even supposed to vote on it, you're supposed to have all these strictures about, you know, the report, the timetable, the number of members,
Deliverables.
and all
Right.
which takes a lot of thought to put together. So I think if people want to take a vote today, it should be in favor of the concept of it, but not in favor of creating a committee, because it doesn't comply with, you know, so you might want to take a sense of the board concept,
Okay.
you know, which we've done sometimes, rather than this, but that would be my thought about this particular motion.
Okay, so maybe by a show of hands, who is supportive of possibly in the future creating a subcommittee? I think that's how you put it.
Yeah, you have,
That sounds like an amendment to the motion.
Why don't you just withdraw you could just withdraw.
Or you can amend the
You can
motion
withdraw
to,
you can withdraw your motion if after
amend
you've
it to
got
finish.
this.
Would you like to withdraw it?
Oh, it's not my motion.
Oh, sorry,
It's
Maria.
Maria's motion.
Well, I feel like we discussed forming a committee in September. It was a concept back then. Is there, all the details, weren't they sort of thought out back then? You know, this is sort of a follow-up to forming that committee. So I guess if I have to amend the motion, I'm going to make a motion to consider a committee? I don't know what the motion is.
Well, I think we need, we need more board discussion and support around exactly what the committee is going to do. How many people are going to be on the committee, what the timeline will be, exactly what the committee will be focused on and reporting back to the board on, before it can actually be considered. Yes, Sherry.
So just a suggestion, maybe if this would be agreeable to Maria, that this could be included in the follow-up discussion in terms of, you know, what does a decision-making process, optimal decision-making process look like? You know, how do stakeholders want to have input into the process? That maybe that could be part of the follow-up discussion.
Can I just ask, because I think creating more work about, you know, whether or not we create a subcommittee, I think it would be good to just have a conversation. Do people want a subcommittee on this topic or not? Or do we want to get reports from Brian and the rest of the administration on a regular basis and make decisions as a board?
That's a fair point.
Yes, Deanna.
I would, my feeling is I would rather that this be more of a committee of a whole board, and we get regular updates from the superintendent and the administration on the work that they've been doing, and so that we're all kind of moving forward at the same pace, and that the entire community is updated. Anybody that's interested can, you know, watch a Board of Education meeting. They can click on the stream and see exactly what the progress that's been made to date what's been done. So that would be my suggestion.
Okay. Anyone else? Katrina?
I think there's two big pieces of information we're missing. It's the traffic study and then some kind of report out on scheduling options. So I feel like we just need more facts. And I think, you know, if a committee were to exist, the right time to form that committee, if we chose to do that as a board, would be following those report outs. So perhaps we postpone and we revisit this discussion as soon as we have all of that data, because I feel at that point, either whether it's the board working as a whole together with the community or a designated subcommittee, that we could make an informed decision based on real scenarios, because right now we don't have scenarios, I think, and enough data to even, you know, discuss the real potential for any outcome. So that's my feeling.
Anyone else?
And just Brendan, if at that time we choose to do that, whoever wants to bring that forward needs to bring it forward in the approved way that the board has, you know, designated for creating committees.
It's all in the bylaws.
It's all in the bylaws, so that's the way it you know, has to be brought forward.
Anyone else?
So to clarify, is that a form we fill out?
Yeah, with deliverables, sorry. It's a form, with deliverables and committee composition and all that kind of stuff. It's all in our bylaws.
Okay. Any other discussion on that topic? Okay. Thank you. Next is action.
We have an open motion still.
Okay. Sorry. Would you like to withdraw the motion?
Table the motion?
I would like to revisit the discussion on the committee at the next meeting. Is that something I can add to the agenda on December 10th, or when our next meeting is? I mean, I want to keep, what's missing right now is the ability for board members to give input before the work is done, because we don't attend the meetings. So how, is there a way to do that?
What meetings, Maria? I'm sorry.
Well, you're the 7 meetings you had with the faculty to get feedback.
Right, yeah, those were meant to be, you know, internal meetings with the staff in order to share the information out with the board here tonight. All of the other meeting was the focus group, which was in public, and certainly all board members were invited to that. And all board members will be invited to the meeting that we're going to have, either, as I said, the end of the week or early next week, given the demands on the schedule. So they're really, That's, I think, one of, for what it's worth, my 2 cents, the advantage of reporting out to the committee of the whole is that it is in public, it's with all of the board members here, and it's all, televised for folks to be able to go back to after the fact. But we've worked hard not to have, meetings that are not open to everyone who has has some thoughts on this. Of course, I'll meet with some of the other administrators, I'll meet with the cabinet to talk about research, to talk about gathering reports, what have you, but all for the purpose of bringing back to the board.
Okay. I mean, I feel like, I thought last June there'd be a committee, September there'd be a committee, now it's too late. I'll rescind my motion, we'll continue as we're going.
All right. Next on the list is our action items, the 2019-2020 budget assumptions, first read.
I am out of order. Hold on. My papers are out of order. I'm not out of order.
You want to go through this?
Very briefly.
Okay.
Yes. So each year, as you know, the administration puts forward our budget goals, budget assumptions, and related priorities. We've been working to bring these forward to the board tonight. As we often say, one of the reasons, I think, for our district's success is our focus, our sustained effort in a variety of different areas. But what we do is we look at the budget assumptions, we do a crosswalk with our district goals, and we make adjustments as we need to. You can see it's a Word document, so it's very easy to see any of the changes. If you flip over to page 2, you'll see that in red are some of the updates here. There's a budget assumption around our alternative program as we continue to develop that. Update as well around our visual and performing arts program. As you'll recall, we have a district goal to begin reviewing our curriculum assessment and staffing in that area. You'll see the LMS part, and we talk about a planned and strategic rollout, which we will be talking about more at our budget workshop next week. Yeah, that's next week. Oh, wow. Time flies. Okay. And you can see some of the smaller changes here as we go. If you flip over to page 4, at the top of 4, you'll see the ALICE training. We do believe in it, and we're going to look to continue our work in training and developing. Again, it is a train-the-trainer model, so I'm thrilled that we have so many people, at least 3 at each building, who are now certified trainers by ALICE, and that's the work we've been doing already with our faculty. But we do want to send some others for the experiential training, and we'll talk about that more. Let's see. You might see at the bottom of page 4 that we had crossed out identifying and implementing opportunities to reduce energy consumption. That's because we moved it and made it more specific. So if you look at the last page, you know that the district is very involved with looking at alternative energy sources and implementing those. We started with our bus fleet a few years ago, natural gas. We had just had some meetings and conversations about solar. We've been talking a little bit about fuel cells and microgrids. So there's a lot going on in the energy sector here in New Canaan. And the Board of Ed, along with the town, are all sort of taking, I think, the right steps in order to develop sustainable and, in lots of cases, renewable energy sources. And then the last, I thought, reflective of the efforts and the time and energy that the board so regularly puts into the health insurance program, that by carefully managing the health insurance program, including fully funding the aggregate stop-loss corridor in partnership with the town, the board continues to meet its fiduciary responsibility to the community while ensuring that it can fulfill its commitments to all NCPS employees covered by the plan. Just a statement of belief around that, I thought, was something that we hadn't put in the past, but it's such an important part of the work that we do in thinking about developing our budget. And I know we've already been in conversation with Joe about our claims history, things like that. So it's just very much a part. So this would be just for a first reading tonight. What I'd ask, if the board's comfortable, is next week, just as we begin our budget workshop, if we could have a second read on this so that we can have our budget assumptions approved going into the workshop. And certainly that gives us time to have any conversation about it if, if the board would like. So I want a motion and a second, but no vote.
Thanks, Tom. Second? Penny?
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is comments from the public. Anyone? Thank you. Announcements and future business.
Okay, let me go to that page. There we go. Well, my first announcement is to say congratulations to our football team. We were ranked number 1 in the preseason poll, and although we had some doubters, I think, in the beginning of the year, they won this weekend, which puts them in the championship game on Saturday. Time and locations to be determined. We expect to hear probably tomorrow when that's going to be. I do believe it's Saturday. Some people call it the state championship game. Other people call it the Marinelli Bowl. Because we'll be playing against Greenwich, where NCHS graduate and former offensive coordinator Lou Marinelli is the coach. I mean, not Lou. Lou is our coach. Lou's son, Johnny, is the coach over in Greenwich. Was a great coach with us. He's doing a wonderful job in Greenwich, and I hope we beat them.
As do we.
So, and we all do, right. I also want to congratulate Saks and everyone involved with the production of Alice in Wonderland this weekend. It really was incredibly well done. So great to be in the Saks Auditorium as well. But the time, the effort, the dedication they have, our 5th and 6th graders, just awesome. And the trophy cases that we talked about last meeting are going right outside of the auditorium, as long as the other ones are in good enough shape to leave them. So they're just making that final decision. But the plan is for them to be right outside the auditorium, and they'll look wonderful. Just as we had hoped. Our next Board of Education meeting is a week from tonight. We'll have our Board of Education workshop. I want to encourage anyone and everyone to come to that. You know, it is a great opportunity to learn about the thinking. It's not a dollars and cents conversation. You know, it's one of the really powerful, I think, ethics here in New Canaan and for our school district and our town is we lead first with the quality of the idea. And that's sort of what the spirit that our budget workshop has put together. It's an opportunity for all of us to talk together about our thinking, about some decisions that have been made, and we're going to be sharing some efficiencies and ways that we've worked to try to continue to build a sustainable program here, but also some new ideas and some new thinking. The people who come hoping for a preview of the actual budget numbers always leave disappointed. It's really, to me, it's a great night because we talk about again, our thinking, our planning, our vision, mission, and goals. And then we get to the dollars and cents on January 7th. And go from there. So hopefully people can attend and join us here in the Wagner Room next week. And there we have it.
Great, thank you. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Katrina, second. Jen, all those in favor? Unanimous. Thanks.